Virginia Beach Police Department and its officers believe in the sanctity of life. We do everything we can to mitigate violent confrontations. We do everything we can to mitigate violent individuals from acting violent in our society. And we need to say that up front before we even get started. We also need to know that officers involved in deadly force situations carry that with them for the rest of their career and for the rest of their life. They do not look upon this simple. They do not look upon this easy. It is a life-changing, a life-altering event, not only for those officers, for the officers that were with them, and for every member of this police agency. On September 5th, 2015, Virginia Beach Police Department surveillance and arrest operation led to an officer-involved shooting that resulted in the deaths of two persons, Angelo Perry of Virginia Beach and India Kager of College Park, Maryland. There was a male infant less than 6 months of age in the car in a rear seat of the vehicle who was not harmed. I need to emphasize a few points. First and foremost, we regret the loss of both Ms. Kager and Mr. Perry in this particular incident. Also need to let you know that for the fourth time in 3 months, officers of the Virginia Beach Police Department were fired upon by armed suspects and then were forced to return fire for their own safety. In 3 of the 4 incidents, the suspect fired multiple rounds at our officers. In this latest case, officers confronted Mr. Angelo Perry, who was heavily armed with a 9mm handgun and had at his feet a Tech 9 semi-automatic weapon. Both weapons were loaded. Mr. Perry is a convicted felon with an extensive criminal record to include crimes of violence. He was released from the penitentiary of May 2014 after serving 12 years of a 13-year sentence for malicious assault with a firearm after he shot multiple rounds at an individual, striking him in the back. On June 10th, 2013, he was charged with another malicious assault in Wise County that was reduced to a misdemeanor. In May 2014, Mr. Perry was placed on parole in Virginia for the original malicious assault charge. His parole was transferred to the state of Georgia, but he has since returned to Virginia Beach. I want it also to be known that officers were unaware of the presence of the infant during this operation until it was concluded and the vehicle in which Mr. Perry and Mr. Kager were traveling in had been secured. The infant has later been identified as the child of Mr. Perry and Ms. Kager. Also wanted to be known that at that scene, officers went to the Walmart on the other end of the shopping center, purchased food, bottles, and diapers for this baby. In essence, the officers were taking care of the child before protective services arrived. There were 4 officers from Special Operations who actually discharged their firearms. These officers were dressed in uniforms, had ballistic vests that clearly marked police that identified them as police officers. Each of the 4 officers are highly trained. They're veteran officers. Time of police experience ranges from 9 to 17 years with the Virginia Beach Police Department and 3 to 13 years with their current assignment in Special Operations. These are highly trained, highly motivated police officers. All of the officers involved have extensively trained, practiced, and conducted actual arrest operations of the one that they used on that Saturday night. All officers are placed on administrative assignment, not administrative leave. They come to work. They have an administrative assignment pending the investigation into this incident as per department policy. There are 3 separate investigations that we have to let you know about. One will be conducted by the Virginia Beach Police Department Homicide Unit, one by the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I believe you have gotten a press release from the CWA's office. Remember, this is the independent investigation. And during our investigation, their investigators will be right with us side by side to determine all the facts, making sure that the investigation is done completely and thoroughly. We will then have a final administrative investigation to determine if the officers' actions were within policy, procedures, and all of their training. Mr. Perry and Ms. Kager are African American. All of the officers involved are Caucasian. The surveillance and arrest operation that was conducted was directly supervised by 3 lieutenants, one from Police Investigations, one from our Criminal Intelligence Unit, and the other from Special Operations. So there was command and control during the entire time of this operation. Now, you're going to have some questions that I'm not going to be able to answer. Some of these questions may be premature to where we are in the investigation. Other questions will be of a nature that we cannot get into them because we have open homicide investigations that we are working. So bear with me if I say I can't answer that question at this time. We want to be as open and transparent as possible, so as more information becomes available and we are at a point where we can release it, we will definitely come back to our public and release it. I want to emphasize that these officers utilized experience and training as best as they could to mitigate a violent confrontation. In essence, the officers put themselves in harm's way to prevent another act of violence which was to be perpetrated in our city, and I will get into that in a moment. But I really want you to know that these officers did everything they could to try and circumvent any type of a violent confrontation with Mr. Perry. Virginia Beach Police Department has been conducting an extensive investigation of a homicide within the city, and for a while has been collecting information on this case. Based on information that was received from the community, Angelo Perry was developed as a person of interest in this case. Investigators began a surveillance of Perry's movements with the assistance of members of the Special Operations who were involved due to Perry's violent criminal past and knowledge that he would be armed. Further information from the community was received, advised that Perry was planning to commit another act of violence within our city. Mr. Perry was positively identified in the vehicle. The vehicle was driven by Ms. Kager. The surveillance teams were the ones who made the positive identification of him. At the time, Mr. Perry and Ms. Kager were the only occupants visible to the surveillance units. While under surveillance, Kager drove her vehicle in what we are going to describe as an erratic and evasive manner. Further information was then received. Commanders of the surveillance operation decided it was time to make the stop of the vehicle and arrest Mr. Perry, pending any future violent acts. Vehicle made its way to the 7-Eleven at 2093 Lynnhaven Parkway, which is at the intersection of Salem Road. They were followed by members of Special Operations. The vehicle pulled into a parking space away from other vehicles and patrons. Members of Special Operations then approached the vehicle consistent with their training, with their experience. They did it in an immediate and very efficient manner. Rather than submitting to an arrest, Mr. Perry, sitting in the front seat, immediately chose to fire multiple rounds of the officers. We know one officer was shot by Mr. Perry. Fortunately, the round went through his shirt. And we believe we have pictures of that for you. The round did not strike the officer. Officers immediately returned fire, striking Mr. Perry with multiple rounds. Unfortunately, Ms. Kager, who was seated adjacent to Mr. Perry in the driver's seat, was also struck by rounds. After the vehicle was secured, officers with Special Operations called their medic forward. We have a full-time medic with Special Operations, and he began life-saving efforts of both Mr. Perry and Ms. Kager. Unfortunately, they succumbed to their injuries. It was at this point the officers found the infant in the back seat unharmed, strapped in a car seat, seated in the rear of the vehicle. We were able to recover a loaded 9mm handgun in Mr. Perry's possession, and a loaded Tech-9 semi-automatic weapon was found at his feet in a bag. The entire incident, when the officers approached that vehicle to the end, lasted less than 15 seconds. We are thankful that none of our officers were injured during this exchange of fire. Since this event, we have notified the families of both Ms. Kager and Mr. Perry. Autopsies of both are being conducted. Our forensics unit has processed the vehicle. All weapons involved have been recovered, have been packaged, and sent for ballistic analysis. The weapons recovered from Perry will be traced, and we have a number of interviews that we still need to conduct. And what we're hoping is if there's any additional witnesses to this, that they will come forward so we conduct interviews with witnesses. Again, this entire incident, from the time those officers approached that vehicle, from the time that vehicle made the stop, the officers approached, the large exchange of gunfire, until the end, lasted less than 15 seconds. We do know that Mr. Perry fired 4 rounds at the officers. We do know that the officers returned fire with 30 rounds. Again, we're thankful none of our officers were injured. And again, I really want to emphasize the tactic that they employed, what they did. Those officers put themselves in a position to attempt to mitigate a violent confrontation. Unfortunately, it did go in that direction. I guess we'll ask some questions. Remember, as I've stated, this is the information that I have at this moment. At this time, additional information will come forward. It may change some of the fact pattern. We don't think it's going to change the major parts of the fact pattern. And if there's questions that we cannot answer, please bear with us. It's because we have an open investigation in this case. We have an open homicide investigation that we do not wish to jeopardize. And that's where we are. So I guess we'll start in reverse order. Start with the newspaper.
Can you name the officers?
I will not name the officers. We've gotten, for a number of reasons, one of which is we did receive a threat last night, so we will not name the officers.
Can you tell us how many officers were total there, aside from the 4?
We're going through debriefs right now. I do not have the exact number of officers who were there from the special operations and from special investigations. We will get back with that. Yes, sir.
Sir, any of the officers involved in previous officer-involved shootings?
No, none of those officers have been involved in any previous OIS cases. We'll start with, I guess, since we're going in reverse, we'll start with 13.
Chief, which homicide did you believe that Perry was involved in?
Again, that's one of the questions we cannot answer because I don't want to jeopardize that particular investigation at this time.
There are additional suspects out there related to that?
Once again, I'm not going to get into specifics on that. You'll have to bear with us. He was a person of interest in a homicide case. And we did know that he was armed. We did know he was heavily armed. We did have credible information that he was going to commit a violent act within our city.
Was that violent act, did that have any connection to the homicide, the previous homicide?
And again, well, I'm not going to be able to get into that specific question. 10.
How long had he been under surveillance?
During that evening, for about 30 minutes.
And in days prior?
I'm not 100% sure. I do know that it was about 30. We do know what his movements were, but actual surveillance was about 30 minutes prior to him pulling into the 7-Eleven.
But when did the surveillance start? Was it days, weeks?
Not going to be able to get into that one.
Is there, you mentioned receiving a threat.
Correct.
Is there any concern right now for public or police safety given how violent he was and kind of his known associates?
Well, we're going to get information out to our officers. The threat was a general threat. It wasn't specific, but I really do not want to put out officers' names at this time. 3.
India Kager, did she ever pose a threat to officers, and why was she shot? Was it just crossfire? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Again, India Kager was sitting directly next to Mr. Perry as the officers were firing. That was incidental, it was accidental, it was not intended. But they were right on top of each other as he was firing his weapon at the officers.
And so, I mean, this happened on Saturday. Why did you wait until today to update the public?
We did give information out yesterday. It happened Saturday night right after midnight. Our officers, myself included, the deputy chiefs were out till sunrise. Sunday, we began to do some latent investigations. Yesterday, we were all given additional briefings, and it was decided we would just hold off to today so we can give you as much information as at this time as we can. Sir.
Can you tell us when the officers, I'm sorry, I'm with the Associated Press. Can you tell us when the officers came up, did they have their sirens on and lights, or did they just come up and say police right up next to the vehicle?
They were in unmarked vehicles. They were dressed in uniform. As they approached the vehicle, verbal commands were given. We also did use, to attempt to mitigate as much as possible, the officers did use a sound light distraction device. And again, they've done this before, and every occasion up to this one ends in a peaceful resolve.
Do they have body cameras?
That's the last question. I was just gonna say, we have time for one more question.
Do the officers all have?
I would prefer to have a question from one of the reporters rather than.
He's with me.
Okay, all right. Officers not have body cams.
Okay, and was there surveillance video at your access from 7-Eleven?
There is.
Okay. And my last question is, you talk about how traumatic this is for them involved in the shooting, and do these police officers, are they going to be able to go back out?
It's a very good question. The officers are given, we have a multi-layered approach when officers are involved in a traumatic event, one of which is peer support. We have a great peer support program. We have the employee assistance program. If they need to sit down and discuss this with counselors, we offer that. There was a time in policing when that wasn't offered. We realized over the course of years that this is a traumatic event for those particular officers. We do realize it's a life-altering event, so we give them all the support we can. We will have them on administrative assignment through this, and then what we will do is bring them back to full duty, but it will be incrementally, and some of it has to be based on how the officer is feeling at that particular time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any further questions, I'll be available via email.
Can we ask a question about the photographs? That,
What are they?
well, I'm just wondering about that uniform. Is that I apologize, I'm maybe having trouble. Is that a blue uniform or a green uniform?
That is green.
Green.
That is green. Virginia Beach Police patches, and on the front it says police, clearly and visible.
Yeah.
Is that the left arm?
It'll be on both. That's the left arm where the bullet went through. He was shot there, the bullet went through. That's gonna be it for right now,
Any
folks,
additional
okay?
questions or